RevZilla Redline for April 2018. I'm Spurge, and here at RevZilla we've been listening to your feedback. And that's why we're kicking things off this month with a ride down here in Texas on the Royal Enfield Himalayan. We've got a lot of great questions about this motorcycle, so we figured we'd start off by answering a few of those questions, starting with what are the highway capabilities of the Himalayan realistically? Now, I was able to get this bike up to about 85 miles an hour. Honestly, I mean, it doesn't feel comfortable there. It feels much more comfortable around 60 to 65 miles an hour. So if you're looking at, getting this bike to be a highway burner, probably not the best option for you, but if you just want to go explore backcountry roads, this might be an excellent option for you to consider. Now, the other thing when we're talking about highway capabilities is the engine on this. It was far less buzzy and vibey than I was expecting from a single-cylinder engine. And it doesn't really give you the old tingle in the butt sensation until you're getting right up to the red line, really pushing it close to that 7,000 RPM mark. I have no faults with how comfortable this engine is for regular riding. We also had a question come through on ergonomics. And, I think a lot of times when people hear adventure bike, they think tall, big, heavy, intimidating, and this is really the antithesis to any of those things. Allie, our camera woman, was able to get on it, and she's about 5'4". She was able to throw her legs over and get both feet in the ground. So I think for shorter riders, this might be something for you to consider if other adventure bikes have been too intimidating for you. Now, coming up in this month's episode, we do have a lot of great stuff for you. Alessandra is going to be hitting some wet weather riding tips for those of you looking to ride through April showers. I will actually be coming back around to talk to you more about the Royal Enfield Himalayan from a reliability standpoint. Then Lemmy's going to wrap things up with a shop tip and to give you a little bit more info on what you can expect from Redline this coming summer. I will check back in with you guys in a little bit.
Now, while Spurgeon was out there tearing it up on the Himalayan, I took a trip to Boyertown, Pennsylvania for Martin Moto's 8th annual Modern Classics show. Now, if you read Common Tread, Spurgeon and I are both a huge fan of this show. I personally feel this is one of the best vintage bike shows on the East Coast. We're always really pleased to go there. So I wanted to bring you back a couple of my highlights from the show, some bikes that I really thought were nifty. And first up, we have a 97 KTM Duke 620, one of the very first factory supermotos. It's also a bike that really offers modern performance. Sure, it's still got a kicker on there. It reminds you it is an older motorcycle. However, you're getting very modern performance out of this bike. This bike was definitely the bike I most wanted to ride in the show. So moving on from there was also a first-gen Suzuki Katana. How cool to see this thing. Those of you who are old enough to remember when this bike hit the streets know that the styling was super controversial on this bike. Nowadays it looks pretty tame, but it really does speak to the fact that this bike influenced a lot of motorcycles going forward styling-wise. It was really awesome to see how well the design has held up now all the way to 2018. Now moving on from there was another bike that I really lusted after, and that was a Victoria Bergmeister. Now some of you may not be familiar with that make or model. Victoria is a German brand. Bergmeister is actually German for Mountain Master. It gives you an idea of exactly what they had in mind for this bike. This bike jumped out at me immediately simply because the engine architecture utilizes a transverse V motor. The other cool thing about this bike is the space race era styling is definitely evident. Everything is sleek and streamlined in this bike. They even covered up the carburetor. It was just a remarkably styled motorcycle. Caught my eye instantly as soon as I walked past it. Now, I'd probably be remiss if I didn't mention too probably the big talk of the show, and that was a 1905 Reading Standard Thoroughbred. This bike took home both a People's Choice Award as well as an Exhibitor's Choice Award. This is actually the oldest known Reading Standard motorcycle in existence today. It was really cool just to see this thing. It's an obvious link between bicycles and early motorcycles. It hit you right in the face as soon as you walked in the door. Really neat bike to see. So if you've never been to the Modern Classics show, I would recommend that you mark it down in your calendar now. For just a few measly bucks, you really are going to a museum for a day. You're going to see 100 motorcycles assembled that you'll never see together again for as long as you live. Always a very good time. Right now, let's go over and meet up with Alessandra and we'll talk rain gear.
I'll be the first to admit that I used to hate riding in the rain, and it wasn't until I found the perfect combination of wet weather gear and tires for my bike that I realized it's all about comfort and confidence. Now, on the confidence end of things, I recently upgraded my tires to these Pirelli Route 66s, and it's really changed the way that I ride. In fact, the first long trip that I took with these, it was cold, it was wet, it was rainy, but I still took the long way home simply because I felt really good on my bike. Now, when I was looking for tires, I knew that I wanted a classic tread pattern and something with better wet weather traction, so I read a ton of reviews. But there are a few other things that you should really look for when you're shopping for tires.
If the idea of reading a gajillion reviews doesn't really appeal to you, there are two terms you can keep your eyeballs out for that will tip you off to a tire's wet weather performance. The first one is silica. Silica-charged rubber compounds tend to perform really well in both cold as well as wet weather. The other word you want to keep your eyes peeled for is siping. Siping are small slits made into the rubber surface of the tire. They help the tire take water up inside of itself and then eject it as it rolls over the pavement. Both lead to really good wet weather grip.
So bikes are one thing, but you want to be equally as comfortable and confident in your gear. One thing that you need to keep in mind is that there are basically two options. There's gear that has a waterproof shell and gear that comes with a liner system where the waterproofing is on the inside. For instance, when I know that I'm going to be in the rain and I'm touring, I use my touring jacket because the shell itself is actually waterproof. But one thing to keep in mind is that when you have a waterproof shell, it's also windproof, which means that it can get a little bit hot. So something you want to look for is direct venting, like these pit zips that I have on my jacket here. Those vent directly to my body.
Now, all of this holds true for jackets and pants. However, if you're shopping for boots or gloves, you should know that those are kind of binary. They're either waterproof or they are not. Now, if you tend to do a lot of wet weather work, you might want to do the same thing that many motorcyclists before you have done as well, is simply have two sets of gear.
Now, thankfully, when it comes to jackets and pants, you do have the options of a liner system. Now, personally, I don't like using liners because it usually means that you have to pull over and zip something onto the inside of your jacket, or remember to zip it in before you leave. The upside, though, is that if you do have a liner system, you get to retain the look of the jacket, keep those abrasion-resistant materials and reflectivity on the outside as well.
Now, it should be noted that you can make just about any gear waterproof by using stuff like this, stowaway rain gear. I tend to use this stuff very frequently, and part of the reason is because this stuff doesn't leave me super duper hot. Gear with waterproof elements built right in tend to sort of trap in heat, and I don't really care for that. Now, the downside to gear like this is that I have to pull over to the side of the road in order to actually get it on. A lot of times I wind up a little bit wet before I find an overpass to tuck in under when I'm throwing on my waterproof stuff.
Yep, so stowaway rain gear is really best for those just-in-case scenarios. That said, if you don't have regular motorcycle rain gear and you just have something like a parka that you maybe had for years, that's another option that you can stow in your bike. For example, when I'm wearing my leather shot, I keep this North Face parka right in my sissy bar bag just in case. One thing to keep in mind whenever you're wearing something that's non-motorcycle specific is that it's not as durable. So for example, recently on a trip, I threw some cheap rain pants into my sissy bar bag, and once I actually got it on the road, it started raining. I put them on. They didn't have any heat resistant materials in there to protect against my exhaust, and they melted to the bike, and it's been pretty tough cleaning it up since then. So that's just something to keep in mind.
Now, another critical piece of rain gear we haven't really discussed thus far is the helmet. Now, regardless of where you stand on the law or safety, the reality is that a full face lid is simply the best to keep in your kisser dry. Now, if you tend to do a lot of wet weather riding, you'll probably find that fog is a real issue. So if you're looking for either a helmet or a face shield, you may want to consider one with this setup here, pin lock. Pin lock is a method of attaching basically a face shield for your face shield. If you note along the perimeter of this face shield, you'll see this line. That's actually a silicone gasket that's separating the two plastic components of this. It traps a pocket of air between them. It acts a lot like a double pane window as far as keeping fog at bay. Now, if you don't want to spend the coin on this, you can simply do the low-tech thing that I do all the time. Simply crack your face shield or just flip it open and the fog will dissipate.
So let me tell you about why Royal Enfield has a bad reputation. Over 50% of the questions that we've seen kind of roll through on the new Himalayan have to do with the quality of the bike itself. And that's because for the past almost 60 years, Royal Enfield really hasn't made any changes to the processes in which these bikes are being built. They're using the same factories, the same toolings as they've been since the company was brought to India in the middle of the 1950s. The problem there is that the rest of the motorcycle world has passed them by. So their reputation has slowly just, fallen off. And I got a chance to have a conversation with the president of Royal Enfield North America. They understand that there's a negative perception here, and there's two main ways that they're looking to address this. And the first is with the actual assembly, the manufacturing. Royal Enfield opened up 2 new facilities last year, a technology facility in the UK, as well as a brand new manufacturing plant in India, the 3rd manufacturing plant to date. And it's the most advanced of all the plants. It's using new tooling, new tech, and they're really working to slowly innovate and update the Royal Enfield motorcycles that are being produced. But the second thing that they talked about that really intrigued me was, getting the bike to America. because it used to be where the bike would come over and the dealership was the first point of contact for that motorcycle. They were the ones in charge of assembling the bike and putting it together and handing it off to the customer. And the real problem there lied in the fact that if you had a good dealership, you got a good bike. If you had a bad dealership, you got a bad bike. There was really no quality control in the Royal Enfield that you were receiving as the customer. And Royal Enfield North America said that's just not working anymore. And about 2 years ago, they opened up a pre-delivery inspection center, and the same techs assemble the same bikes every day. They go through the same 100-point inspection, and that's a big deal. The customer's perception of when they get that bike fresh off the showroom floor is slowly changing. They really understand the fact that there's a long-term goal here for the Royal Enfield brand in North America. And for me, I now get to go out and ride the Himalayan. So we have an upcoming first ride review of this bike. I'm like right in here. Those are tears of pain. It's like I've been on crutches my entire life. What do you got so much? You were expecting a video bike review on the Royal Enfield Himalayan. Well, the joke is on you because I have crashed. Oh God, oh the pain. Oh, I laid it down. But fear not, I got plenty of seat time on this puppy, and there will be a written review on Common Tread that you can check out if you want more information on the Royal Enfield Himalayan.
So in today's shop tip, we're going to discuss a simple yet daunting task, and that's mixing up two-stroke premix. Now you may be watching this saying, Lem, I don't have a two-stroke bike. You still might want to hang in there though, in case you have, say, a weed eater or a chainsaw at your house. The process is exactly the same. So it's really important that we get this correct simply because the lubricant for a two-stroke is contained within the fuel. You have to add the proper amount or you might be facing an early engine rebuild. Now the first step in this process actually isn't to do anything at all except for hitting the books. You need to find out what ratio your fuel and oil need to be mixed at. Older machinery uses often a 32-to-1 mix. That's 32 parts fuel to 1 part oil. Now newer stuff like this KTM we're going to be gassing up today often has a much leaner mix. You might be looking at a mix ratio of say 60-to-1. So it's important to find out exactly what your manufacturer recommends and stick with that guideline. The other important thing too is knowing what to put in your motorcycle. So if you have one of those older 32-to-1 machines, something like this conventional two-stroke oil might be just fine. However, there are some bikes, much like this KTM, that spec out a synthetic oil. You want to make sure you're putting in the correct oil to make sure that, again, you're not facing that early rebuild scenario. Now before we get kicking here, I want to talk about our gas can just a little bit. We're going to be using this to fill up our bike today. Now you can see here on the side of this thing is actually graduated out. We have a 2-gallon mark here. This is a good can to use this for simply because there's lots of room up above here so we can actually add the oil in. We're not going to be overflowing the can. Now one of the ways you can cross-check too that 2-gallon mark when you're filling up is also look at the dispenser. Make sure that the 2-gallon mark here roughly correlates with the 2 gallons you should be getting out of the fuel pump itself. Also notice that I've labeled this can. I think this is really important. First, we have the ratio on there, 60-to-1. This can be important again for those of you who might have a weed eater or a chainsaw sitting in the shed next to your dirt bike. You don't want to mix up the wrong ratio between equipment. The other thing that's really important too is also having the fact that it's two-stroke marked right on there. One of the most deadly things you can do for a two-stroke is straight gas it. That's not a good scenario. Again, you're going to be looking at an early engine rebuild. So once we've got 2 gallons worth of fuel in our can, it's time to add some oil. To me, the easy way to do this job is with a ratio cup. And a ratio cup has all sorts of information on it that should make this job really, really simple. So we're going to go to the 2-gallon column because we're using 2 gallons worth of fuel and slide right down the ratios here until we hit the 60-to-1 line. That's the amount of oil we're going to add to the fuel. Throw the oil in the cup, drop it into your gas can. Now at this point, you're not quite done. One of the things I like to do is to take some of that premix and slop it back into the cup. Cap the cup, mix it around just a little bit so you catch all that residual oil, and then throw that back into your gas can. From there, you're gonna wanna take your gas can, vigorously shake it up to make sure you disperse that oil throughout the fuel, and you're ready to rock and roll. You're set to gas up your bike.
Spurgeon, you hear that?
Did I hear what, Lem? I just got to sleep, bud.
Did you put the hot dogs away?
What the hell are you guys doing in the parking lot?
For testing.
Testing for what? A concert?
No, we're testing camping gear.
You guys are idiots. Buzzsaw and I already picked the best gear. It's in the studio.
We are idiots. In fact, we're idiots going on a camping trip. Next time you see us, we'll be in June, where we'll be sleeping in the dirt using the stars for a blanket.
That's right, RevZilla's sending us out into the wild to have an adventure, specifically to show you some of the hijinks that Lemme and I are getting into on a regular basis. And in fact, we're going to reach out to you guys and ask for your input. What would you like to see Lemmy and I cover in future episodes of the Redline? So if you've got any really cool ideas, send them over to redline@revzilla.com.
And as always, if you want any more info on any of the stuff you've seen, cruise on over to RevZilla.com, where you can check out articles, videos, and our hot takes on all things motorcycle. We'll see you in June on the RevZilla Redline.